The first missed call came at 9:14, the second at 9:16. By 10, he had already stopped counting and started replaying the one he had finally answered in his head. A clipped "Where are you?" swallowed by static and the hiss of rain against the windshield. He could hear the way his own voice had sounded, then steady, patient, but one more time. Like an actor rehearsing a scene he hoped never to perform. Matteo Moretti's phone glowed on the passenger seat of his car, a neat rectangle of black glass. 33 missed calls, it told him, a small numeric badge of neglect. He had learned to ignore 100 things. The ache in his knee, the guilt that tasted like pennies, the way competitors smiled over lunch. But the phone was not negotiable. The phone was Elena. Elena Rossi had been with him 5 years. She was 30, efficient in white shirts and sharp pencil skirts, the kind of woman whose ability to anticipate a thought made him feel dangerous in the right places and sensible in others. She managed logistics, kept ledgers clean, scheduled meetings, smoothed the edges away from his life so he could be only what the city needed him to be. She kept secrets because that was her job and because she liked the power that came with knowledge no one else had. The office whispered that she was his right hand. Others suggested something more. Matteo had never felt the need to clarify. He liked the ambiguity. It made people behave. He had called her at 8:30. No answer. He called again at 8. No answer. By 9, when he'd left the warehouse and taken his car into the city for what had been supposed to be a routine meeting with partners in the import business, he had a knot in his throat and a dull, growing hunger that had nothing to do with food. The 33 calls were not a tally of abandonment. They were a thermometer of how quickly the world he thought steady could heat into pain. It began, like most things that consumed men who had built empires with promises and threats, in a way that seemed trivial at first. Elena had texted 2 words. The night before. Going out, no explanation. He had replied with a single word. With. She had not answered. That alone would have been fine. People had private lives. Matteo had always respected that. But then she turned down his request to join the company dinner the following week. Excuse. Family. She shrugged it off with a short text. She'd been working long hours. She needed to breathe. Matteo accepted it because it was reasonable. Then, the lead that had been so promising for his Leeds real estate venture stalled, and Matteo found that several critical emails had been unsent. He asked Elena about it the next morning. She told him that emails had been delayed. Sister Marin moved on. Trust, in Matteo's world, was an instrument. You treated it carefully. You kept it sharpened, and you kept it close. He parked on a side street outside the little cafe, on the corner where the city smelled of burnt coffee and exhaust. He could see the doors through the rain-scattered window, a fisheye of the day. Elena had told him, over the last 2 years, the way a storm changes light. The city's glass becomes a mirror for people's faces. Sometimes that mirror reveals truths that are better left cracked. On the pavement across the street, she passed with someone. He hadn't intended to look. He had told himself he wouldn't let curiosity become weapon. But the human face has a traitor's patience. It sees what it wants to see and then refuses to unsee it. She was laughing. The man with her tall, a shade younger, with a careless collar and a laugh that released something in her like light reached for her hand. It was the kind of gentle thing Marie at the flower shop would call a public possession. Elena? did not wear her joy like armor. She allowed it in flashes. But that hand, the ease between them, it was a public punctuation Matteo had not expected. He watched them move down the street, and the world compressed into the distance between them. He should have driven away. He should have pretended not to see. Instead, he sat in his car and let the 33 missed calls collect something heavier than numbers. An accusation. The jealousy that crept over Matteo surprised him by how small it smelled. He'd imagined it would be volcanic, a heat so blunt that it would melt steel. Instead, it was something domestic, sharp in the throat like cheap wine. He replayed their early days like an old surveillance tape. Elena hunching over files, the way she touched the edge of a page, the quiet competence that had made him put her in the center of his world. He had always known her to be precise. Was she precise with others as well? He thought of favors done, of nights when she'd stayed late to cover his mistakes, of the way she'd arranged meetings that kept him a step ahead. He had expected loyalty. He had not expected tenderness. Matteo was capable of affection. He was also, in the quiet spaces, someone who measured risk. Love and attachments, as he had explained to a friend once, were just investments. You weighed the return. Elena's visibility, as he now thought, other visibilities a liability. It might be a pleasure. It might be a collapse. Jealousy sharpened his mind. It made him read details for meaning. The crease of a sleeve, the timbre of a laugh, the angle at which a head turned. He called her anyway. The phone did not ring. He called until the number of calls multiplied into the 3 dozens that now vibrated on the passenger seat like a small, accusing insect. Elena answered on the 34th ring. He listened to the delay, the slight catching in her breath, then the quick, professional cadence she adopted when handling a situation in the office. "Matteo," she said, tentative, "where are you?" He asked Dot. He ends ... out. "I didn't think you'd mind. It's nothing, just a friend." He could hear the softness in the word friend. It landed somewhere like a pebble hitting glass, small at first, then the whole face fractured. "You're out with a man," he said, more plainly than aloud. Double quotes, yes. She spoke like someone explaining a weather report. "His name is Luca. He's an old university friend. I bumped into him. We decided to grab coffee. That's all." Matteo imagined the man, saw the casual icy of elbow-to-elbow gestures, the familiarity of shared jokes. He tried to sound lighter. "You could have told me. You could have called," she said, and there was the honest edge of reproach in it. "You didn't." He was taken aback. The thought stung him more than the sight had. She'd spoken truth. This was a life he was not always part of. It had been his choice. Sometimes he had wanted to know everything. Sometimes he had repressed knowledge to make the world work. Now the balance shifted. He felt the old, familiar roar of territory being crossed. "Come home," he said. "I want to talk." "Talk about what?" Elena asked. He couldn't answer. The word jealousy tasted like cowardice on his tongue. He didn't want to admit the smallness of it. "Come home," he repeated. "Now." She paused, a hesitation that turned the line into an abyss. "I'll be home in an hour. Make it 30 minutes. "Matteo," she sounded like she had been slapped. "This is ridiculous." The line went dead. 30 minutes passed like a long, deliberate punishment. He watched the wet city move, the reflective puddles shiver, Pedestrians fold up with their collars like they were hiding. He drove to the square where the cafe was, circled the block, finding himself where he began. A man tracing a line he had no right to. When she finally arrived at his flat, the rain had stopped. Elena's hair clung to her face. She looked tired, but not apologetic. She kept her bag at her side like a shield. "I told you an hour," she said. "You told me 30. "I don't like being lied to," Matteo said. He heard the theatricality of his voice and tried to soften it. "You didn't tell me you were going out." "I didn't think you needed to know," she replied. "Not everything is for you. We have a life outside this place, Matteo." "You don't tell me," he said. He could feel how brittle the conversation had become. "You don't even text. You don't want me to have a life outside this place." Her eyes were flat. The accusation came like a dart. "You want me at the center of your world. That's not how people are supposed to be." Matteo bristled. "I give you a lot. I provide certain protections. You don't provide me anything I didn't earn," she interrupted. "I work for you because I am good at my job. Don't reduce me to a debt that you can point to when it suits you." He wanted to be reasonable. He wanted to explain that his life was not merely a job. It was an architecture of risks, but in the way of men who have learned to be decisive. His temper took the elevator before his better judgment could catch the stairs. "You are with a man, in public," Matteo said. "You didn't tell me. You don't respect the boundaries I set." "We didn't set any boundaries," she said, softer now. "You set the rules. I just try to survive them." "You shouldn't be laughing with him," Matteo said, the words out of his mouth before he had sifted them with care. "Not in front of me." Elena's jaw tightened. "Who made you my judge?" The argument spiraled into small injuries. Finances, late nights, the way Matteo controlled access to people who mattered. She accused him of possession. He accused her of betrayal. Their voices climbed and broke like wave crests, each crash exposing old cuts. The old man who ran the building's concierge watched them through the intercom as if he were reading a newspaper. The neighbors must have heard some fragments. The word friend shouted like an affront. The phrase, "You don't tell me," the rustle of a silk shirt being pushed aside. But in the apartment above, the city held its breath and let the quarrel settle into the silence that came after accusations. A spat like small stones. Matteo paced. He wanted to brandish power, to lay down a map of rules and have her sign them. That was his first instinct. But power without patience breeds disaster. He paused, studying her face. In the end, it was not the idea that she might be with a man. That consumed him. It was what it meant in the structure of his life. Unpredictability. Elena was meant to be his anchor. Anchors, by their nature, are not flown away with the first passing gust. "I can't have you laughing with him," he said finally, and the sentence made him feel ridiculous. "You can't have me at all," Elena replied, as if listing a fact of the world. "You can't own me." That stung. Ownership was never his term until now. He felt it applied by default. He looked away, seeing himself as someone other people feared rather than liked. The truth cracked open. Perhaps she had never been his in the way he'd supposed. The next morning, Matteo's people started calling. "You heard about the warehouse?" one voice asked. There were unexpected auditors. Another said, "Luca's been asking questions about your shipments." The world, he realized, was a series. of intersecting causes. Jealousy had made his sight narrow, but that did not mean it had no teeth. Lucalina's companion in the cafe was not the easy distraction he'd first appeared. Emails revealed that he had worked in a shipping firm with ties to Ports Mateo. Had long used. He had a laugh that opened doors. His circle was wider than a stewed reunion. Mateo's chest tightened. Every ally, every connection mattered. No one man lived in isolation in the game he had mastered. If Elena's associations could reach into his business, then this was no longer about a lunch. It was about liability. He felt the old machinery engage the talk, the inquiries, the subtle placements of people in the flow of information. Men like Mateo never fought with one emotion. They translated feelings like jealousy into plans. He had his lawyer look into. The Emosi had his drivers check the port logs. He had bodyguards shadow the logistics men. The world is expensive when you allow it to be. Elena, for her part, bristled at the new attention. Within days, the office felt like a glass cage. People watched her with new eyes once curious and calculating. She resented that she had to explain herself when the rules had always favored. Men in suits. Mateo's presence shifted the air. He did not speak much at work. His silences were precise instruments. But he controlled things with the economy of a man who had learned to move mountains with whispers. One evening she found a man waiting by her car in the office lot. He was not aggressive, but he wore the posture of a man sent to do a job. "Luca's been making calls," he said, blunt and unembellished. "He wants to meet." Elena felt the old, tired annoyance. She had a life outside of his orbit, and did not want it policed. But the world had rules and written things you honored if you wanted to remain in safe zones. She called Luca, and they agreed to meet at a neutral place. A diner by the docks. The diner smelt of grease and coffee, the kind of place that knows how to be anonymous. Luca arrived with a plastic smile and a patience that felt rehearsed. He spoke of trade routes and new clients and the strange market for moving goods through less conspicuous channels. It was not that he wanted to work for Mateo, he was interested in information. He wanted to exchange contacts, a sort of barter that ran on favors. Elena listened with the careful neutrality she'd always used. She wasn't interested in being a conduit for men who trafficked in the unseen economy. She liked her job to be clean, a ledger balanced with precision. But Luca had a charm that was not merely professional. He asked about her work, prodded at her attachments with feigned curiosity. He asked if the job was lonely. "It can be," she said. "Sometimes. You're very close with Mateo," he observed. "It must be strange, being so trusted." She was wary. Trust is complicated in his world. He tilted his head. "Do you like him?" She considered the question like one decides whether to cross a street. "I respect him," she said finally. "He pays well." He laughed, low and private. "Is that what people say when they don't want anything to change?" She left the diner with a mixture of irritation and a small, flaring curiosity. She did not bother to analyze. There was, she realized, with an odd sensation, a freedom in being watched by someone who was not invested in her survival. Mateo's jealousy did not subside. It grew methodically, not in fierce eruptions, but in cold calculation. He had men follow Luca's cars, check his apartment, run his calls. They found nothing overtly criminal, just the kind of networked life that cities store like loose change. There were meetings, names, a handshake here and an agreement there. The men kept a folder and fed it to Matteo like so many breadcrumbs. What angered him more was not any direct threat, but the way Elena's independence shone in those small moments. She had a laugh that came with the lift of her head. She had an insistence on certain coffees, a way of adjusting the collar of her shirt that, seen often enough, becomes private knowledge. Matteo wanted to possess those small things and to ensure they belonged only to him. He wanted to be the only person allowed to read her small, private codes. The discovery that she might be a person with choices that did not have him as a center, was like water finding a hairline crack and widening it. The confrontation came on a night of thin rain. Matteo was in his office, a long room, with glass that overlooked the river and the glittering hum of the city. The office belonged to a man who worshipped order, files stacked in precise increments, art that was tasteful and unpretentious. A safe hidden in a closet, not for show, but because men like him keep things that cannot be trusted in the open. Elena came in late, hat soaked, hair loose in a way she seldom allowed in front of clients. She had the tired look of someone who had been present for a day that demanded more than it gave. Matteo, without rising, watched her remove her coat. The knowledge that he had watched her from near, and often made the moment intimate in a way that made his chest ache. "You're going out tonight," he said. She blinked. "I am. With whom?" "You ask that every time," she said, and there was a defiant flavor to it. "Why does it bother you so much?" "It's not about who," he said. "It's about respect." She smiled at him like a small, weary animal. Respect is not a demand. It's mutual. He stood, moving, toward her in a way that suggested intention. "You went out with a man. So you didn't tell me." "You're my boss," she said. "You pay me. You can't tell me what to do outside of work. You do your job inside, and I do mine outside. The two overlap." He took a breath and tried to be careful. "I'm asking because I thought we were different." She looked at him then, and for a moment the world felt like glass between them, clean and transparent. "Different how?" "You are my right hand," he said. "You are mine to protect." She laughed then, a sound that had no humor. "To protect, or to own. You know the difference," Matteo insisted. "You help me, and you help." "Me," she answered. "Stop pretending this is one-sided. If you were with him, he's more than a coffee." The sentence trailed like a threat. "No," she said. "He's not." "You don't get to decide what I worry about," Matteo said, more sharply than he intended. "You don't get to decide what I do," she said. "Matteo, I am not your property. I am not an asset. I am a person." He had sky-high patience for danger and low tolerance for emotional mess. The two things clashed tonight. He stepped forward and gently took her hands. He wanted confusedly to anchor her in some act that would prove she was with him. "Show me," he said. She pulled her hands away. "Show you." Her voice was incredulous. "Are you asking me to prove my life to you?" He felt his anger flare. It was a dangerous, animal heat. He allowed it, but did not let it eclipse his control. "Just tell me who he is," he said. "Elena," he repeated, a small prayer. "Tell me who he is." She paused. "Luca," she said finally. "He's a man I've known for a while. That's it. We have coffee. Sometimes we talk. That doesn't mean anything. You keep saying that, he sighed. But I saw you, Lafine. You showed him your teeth. You were not in a hurry to leave his company. She straightened, fierce as if offended by his smallness rather than its origin. If that's the worst thing I've done, then I'm doing fine. That night, Matteo slept badly. The city outside moved on its rails. He thought about the ledger of feelings he kept. He wanted to be possessive without admitting it. He wanted clear boundaries without confessing his fear. He knew, with a grim, technical logic, that the only way to control the problem was to put people where they belonged. He would not humiliate her. He would not order her. He would act with the precision of a surgeon, closing the wound with a neat stitch. The next day, his people found a way to reroute Luca's company's lines-friendly calls from clients, slight diversions in contracts, a tightening of supply that made Luca look like a man who couldn't deliver on time. Small things, bureaucratic squeezes that would make anyone with a network reliant on assumptions stumble. Luca scraped and called his US UAL channels. A week of inconveniences later, he stopped calling Alina. When she noticed, she looked at Matteo with suspicion and then with anger. You did that, she said. He did not deny it. You work here. He tried to explain the economy of risk. I'm protecting the company. You protect the company by making it a prison, she said. You think the way you fold a mapu can fold people too? You can press a life flat to fit your lines. It's not about folding, he said. It's about safety. You don't get to decide what's safe for me. The words left her like currency. You are not my keeper. The office grew colder. People talked in the way they always do, soft voices, raised eyebrows. Elena drew inward. Matteo felt the chasm widen. He had removed the perceived threat, but in doing so he had forced a fundamental truth to the surface. He wanted her to be his in a way she had never been and never would be. There were offers after that, offers of promotion, new titles to make, her more deeply embedded in his world. He tried buying loyalty with the currency he understood. She declined the promotions with a flat refusal that hurt him more than any insult. She had ambition, but not ambitions that were extensions of his. She wanted her own shape. You can't have both, Matteo said finally, the night he admitted it to himself. You can't be both free and the person I want you to be. And you can't be both ruler and friend, she said. You can be one or the other. He loved in his own way. Love in his world was not uninterrupted rose petals. It was calculus and restraint seasoned with rare, bright tenderness. But love is a fragile instrument. Passion bends it. Time dulls it. Jealousy had sliced into him, not with a sword, but with a steady, repetitive grind. He had traded dignity for control. Then came the evening with the gun. It happened at the docks, under sodium light that made the river look like an ugly artery. Luca had returned, stubborn and perhaps reckless. He showed up with a defiance that angered men like Matteo, men who viewed the city as a chessboard. The encounter was not meant to be public, but the docks have no secrets. The gulls, the wind, the men who work shipping know when someone is trying to make a move. Matteo found him in an alley, Luca's jaw set, hands empty. There was no dramatic fight words first, sharp and precise. Matteo asked him why he had been seen with Elena. Luca smiled like someone who enjoys a game he cannot lose. We had coffee. We talked. That was it. This ends, Matteo said. The word did more than announce. It functioned like a contract. Luca, young and cocky, laughed. You can't order voids, all right? You don't own her. The grin was arrogance. It lit a match on Matteo's temper that had been simmering for weeks. The reply was a controlled, cold thing. You're wrong. Luca lunged suddenly, a desperate move. Matteo's response was automatic. A shove, a jolt, a hand into a pocket, a small click. The gun he kept for precise safety, an iron trinket that never slept, came into the cool dock air. The world narrowed to the white flare of the barrel and the small, infinite possibility that a single bullet changes everything. He aimed. He did not want to kill. Men like Matteo are not pleased by blood that stains, but a gun points in ways. Words fail. It is the force that finishes threats without messy hands. Luca babbled, hands raised. Matteo's finger angled toward the trigger like a man measuring the gravity of a planet. Leave Elena out of it, Matteo said. Luca laughed. Then, the sound of a man who had misread everything. You think I'm the problem? You think I'd be the one to fall for your game? The gun muzzle flashed. The sound cracked, the night open, like someone folding a heavy book in half. Men ran from other alleys, voices rose. Luca fell, a small shape, and the world blanched into sharp outlines. The aftermath was the kind of thing Matteo had rehearsed and never wanted to endure. The docks screamed with phone calls that were more like accusations than news. Men who worked for Matteo's network swarmed like herod bees to the light in the darkness. Elena, because she always knew where to go, writhed in a rain of shoes. And hair and horror. She was smaller than he'd imagined in that moment. A person whose face betrayed a grief that no tidy explanation could mop up. She dropped to her knees beside the fallen man. Matteo stood and felt suddenly foreign on his own feet. The act of violence reduced everything. His power, his plans, his polite self-images. Elena, he said, because it seemed the only possible salve in a situation that reeked of irreversible choices. She looked up at him, her face raw and uncomprehending. Why? She whispered. And the sound was not a question about Luca, but a question about him, a voice asking what he had become. He tried to explain what drives men in his circles to make certain choices. He tried to tell her it had been for protection, for honor, for the stabilization of threads. He told the same stories his men told each other over cigars and strong coffee. They sounded hollow in the face of blood. You've destroyed him, she said finally, and her tone was not screaming, but the ice edge of precise accusation. You killed a man for what? For jealousy? For territory? You should have told me, he said. The refrain of a man who tries to make everything about a small script. He didn't have to be your enemy, she said. You made him into one. Matteo's silence matched the night. The police came. Matteo's lawyers arrived like a second tide, smoothing edges and buying time. The docks had witnesses, men who owed him favors and men who feared him. The state of the city money influence. Contacts began to stack like an auctioneer's. Inventory. Charges were discussed in hushed voices. Matteo sat in rooms with men in suits and heard the language of consequences spoken like bills. He kept one mental ledger that he did not show others. The cost of his actions and the currency of faces he had broken. He had thought his architecture invincible. It broke with a single crack. Alina was not ready to forgive. She wanted answers. They were not about strategy. She wanted him to have explained, in a way that would make the ruin visible and perhaps bearable. Instead, she found bureaucracy and explanations of safety protocols and the language of men who had calculated things until all feelings were footnotes. "You loved him," she said once, low in the office where papers smelled like old trees and ink. "Or you loved your idea of him. You loved the version of yourself that a possession reflects." "You don't get to say what I love," he said. "You were reckless." "You were reckless enough to shoot a man," she replied. Her hands were fists. "You don't get to make that a private decision." He could feel his world tilt. The money men withdrew. Old friends explained the legal troubles would be inconvenient. He saw, with the clarity of a falling man, how small choices spiral into avalanches. In the months that followed, Matteo learned what losing looks like. The courtroom was a theater of his ambitions. Lawyers with polished shoes, witnesses whose testimonies folded into different shapes as lawyers maneuvered. The city had not forgiven him, but the law had limits, and his resources were significant. He pleaded a strategy of defense, self-defense, a provoked man, a danger to life. The press spun it into narratives: a jealous mafia boss, a tragic brawl, a cautionary tale. Alina testified. She did not paint him as a monster. She did not absolve him either. She spoke of the man she had known, efficient, generous in small acts, prone to controlling impulses. She told the truth of a relationship that was more complicated than jealous lover meets rival. Her testimony was a sewing needle in a ragged seam. Matteo watched her on the stand and felt both pride and shame. He was proud that she had the courage to tell truth. He was ashamed for having made that truth necessary. The verdict was not the cliff edge Matteo had feared. It was a compromise, the legal system's way of acknowledging that men do bad things and that consequences must be assessed with nuance. He served time, not a long term, but long enough for silence to sit in his apartment and for the city to rotate its sympathies. The business suffered. Friends retreated. Men who once laughed with him at the end of a table now called on occasion to see if he required anything. The public moved on, as it always does. It retains short memories for scandal and long memories for faces. Alina, too, moved on in complicated ways. She did not leave his world entirely some knots, whole because they are useful and because people are more tangled than they admit. But she changed jobs. She found a post that was more distant from Matteo's immediate control. She lived more carefully in the spaces of her choices, her laughter measured but returning in small bursts. There were interviews later, televised versions of the story: the jealous boss, the assistant, the tragic man. People filled comment boards with easy judgments. Matteo stopped reading them. He had once loved power as an end. Now he realized it was a means to a fragile life. He had used violence to carve a boundary he thought needed to be enforced. Instead, he had cut something irretrievable. One late autumn evening, months after he was released, Matteo went to a small cafe. He sat at a table near the window where the light made a soft halo on the countertop. Alina entered, wrapped in a coat, hair tamed into a loose bun. She paused when she saw him, but then approached in a manner that said she was prepared for anything. They did not hug. Distance had become a fact. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Black. They sat and talked about banal things. She spoke of books she'd read and of a garden she'd begun on a narrow balcony. He spoke awkwardly of things that felt necessary. Reparations. His lawyers had arranged, the men he had fired quietly, the accounts he had closed off. He wanted at that moment to clean things, as if cleaning would make amends. Do you regret it? She asked finally, looking at him like someone trying to read handwriting by the light of a candle. He swallowed. The question was heavy because it demanded more than silence. Every day, he said, for different reasons. Sometimes I regret because I didn't control my temper. Sometimes I regret because I misread you. Sometimes I regret because I thought I could protect you by being the sort of man who removes threats. You removed a life, she said. It was not a verdict as much as a factual statement. You took away a possibility. He nodded. I know. And yet, she said, we are still here. You are still you. I am still me. People change in different ways. You forgive me. He blurted. You don't get that kind of currency. She said, forgiveness is private and complicated. Maybe over time a kind of truce forms. Maybe not. What matters is you know what you did and you don't repeat it. He listened. The sentence was a bridge suspended over a drought, fragile and fraught, but possibly crossing. They finished their coffees. The day outside had the crispness of winter's first approach. Elena left first. Matteo watched her walk, feeling the old ache like a bruise. He had learned that possession is an ugly word and that attempting to own someone is a straightforward violence that often ends in collateral ruin. He had learned that jealousy is not the big flames of pirate stories, but the slow conflagration of a small, persistent hunger. That night he sat in his office, looking out at the river where lights fractured into lines. He pulled out his phone and stared at the memory of 33 missed calls. They had been a petty tally at first, a trivial sign that the world had attention to spare. Now they were a map. The moment when he lost the plot, he did not know if Alina ever loved him beyond the complicated, professional loyalty that had bonded them. He did not know if Luca had ever been anything more than a conversation and a coffee. What he knew was the cost. The ledger would be heavy for the rest of his days. That ledger did not balance with money. It balanced with faces and names and the quiet returns of people who keep living after you've taken something awful from them. Years later, a courier left a small box at Matteo's door. Inside were 33 white envelopes, folded and tied with a piece of rough string. Each envelope contained a photograph, a small memory of a day with people who had been ordinary and, for a moment, luminous. Elena laughing with a friend. At a market stall, Luca in a park feeding pigeons. The two of them at a cafe, mundane and human. There was a card that read, "For the man who learns from small counts. May you never forget how numbers can be more than a tally." Matteo held the photographs until his hand shook. He had had many ways to measure his life money, influence, the length of his sentences in court. The 33 envelopes were a different measure. They asked him to see what he had not counted, the tenderness he had scared away with force. He understood then, in a manner that was both unromantic and precise, why people kept certain things private. He also understood why some things had to be public, why truths needed to be seen to be believed. Jealousy had consumed him once. It had been a slow erosion in the shape of a list of missed calls. He had tried to answer those calls with force. The force had answered back by taking a life and freeing him to live with the question of whether a man who loves through ownership can ever belong to anything but his own shadows. He kept the photographs on his desk for a long time. They did not absolve him. They did not say he was redeemed. They were simply an instrument of visibility, reminders that people are nobody's property, reminders that lives are full of small private joys that do not need to be announced to the world to be real. Matteo learned to make quieter decisions. He learned to ask before he acted. He was not a saint. He was a man who had been allowed to continue living with a debt that would never fully be paid. He accepted that. It was the only way left to keep moving.